in the 18th century, this building would have looked a lot different. This building that currently stands here on the property at Kenmore is a reconstruction. This building was built in the 1930s, and we do have one surviving photograph of the original kitchen that would have been built in the 1770s when Kenmore was originally built, and we know that that structure would have been made of wood, and it would have been slightly larger than what we see here today, what we have built here today. Archaeological work has been done here so that we know exactly where the hearth was. So the hearth that's behind me right now is in the correct location. We know that that is where the hearth was in the original kitchen, but the hearth looks a little bit different. The hearth that we have here now is off the floor. In the 18th century, that would have been level with the ground, and that is because you could pull coals out and kind of create as many places to cook as possible. You could pull coals out all the way into the floor and have 12 different dishes cooking as opposed to just having the space in the immediate fireplace.
That many?
Yes, you could have basically an endless number of dishes if you had the amount of coals, because they can just be put basically anywhere on the floor.
Yeah.
Because we have a brick floor now, but the floor would have been made of dirt then, so you could basically dig pits or wherever you needed to work, you could work. We would have had a lot of workspace in here. All 3 meals would have been created here in the kitchen and then taken through the servants' quarter passage into Kenmore, into the dining room, so that the meals could be prepared and make it to the table in a timely fashion while they're still hot. So that passageway leads basically directly from the kitchen into the dining room in order for food to get there in a good manner.
Were fires a concern since this was a wood structure?
Yes. The buildings in the 18th century that were created to be kitchens were usually made of wood, and that is because fires basically did burn down the kitchens a lot, and that's also why they are separate. So the fact that the wooden kitchen probably made it through the Civil War time period, about 100 years, is pretty impressive, because usually wooden kitchens would burn down pretty regularly. So fire was a concern, but it was just part of life in the 18th century.
This was to be cooking in this space for as many people as they would be cooking for. This was, I guess, always busy.
Yes, the fire probably would have been burning all day, every day, and then into the night as well. When the fire wasn't actively being used to cook, the coals would have been banked up, which means that they would just be gathered together. So they would always be staying hot. And then in the morning, when the cook got up, probably before sunrise, she or he could have taken those coals out and restarted a fire very quickly. So in the summertime, this would have been an incredibly hot space to be. And remember that the cook and his or her family would have stayed in the kitchen as well, probably above stairs. The enslaved population had a lot of different places that they could have stayed, but the cook and the scullery maid who would have been helping the cook, them and their families would have stayed here in the kitchen. So this would have been a very busy place, always making food, always preparing bread, always having a fire. Being an enslaved cook on a plantation like this in the 18th century probably would have been one of the more difficult jobs, because the cook had to be trained not only in English style food, but also things like French food, and then all the other styles that would have gone into the colonial diet of a plantation owner in that time period. Whatever the plantation owner wants, they would have to make. So they had to be heavily trained. They probably might have known how to read or write, so they could read recipes. Yeah. They would have been very well trained, very skilled, and very knowledgeable about their position. But it's not an easy job, physically, mentally, all of that kind of thing. It is a very challenging position. 24/7, yes,
the way you talk about it.
All the time. And if there's a party going on at Kenmore, they would have been staying up into the night, very late, and then of course they still have to be up early to make breakfast the next morning. So it is an all the time, around the clock job.
What about preservation? Food preservation? How was that done?
There's lots of different methods of food preservation. There's a lot of different things that were done in the 18th century depending on the type of food. So we have things like salting. Salting meat was very popular. Also smoking. Smokehouses were usually on a big plantation like Kenmore's, so you could smoke your meats. And then also things like pickling. Pickling was always used, so using vinegar and different brines to create juices to preserve things in. So there's all kinds of different methods that would have been used to preserve food in the 18th century, so you could store your food from the harvest into the winter when food was not as plentiful in that time.
Looking at this and seeing and just how you describe it, you see why people talk about why when refrigeration came, how that was just changed society so much. You see it right here.
Oh yeah. There wasn't this idea that you could just, put something in the fridge, keep it for a week, and you'd be fine. Especially things like leftovers. You couldn't just put your leftovers in the fridge. Things kind of had to be kept in a very specific manner in order for you to be able to feed your family for the next few months. So refrigerators definitely changed how we live as a society. It was a major turning point in that preservation aspect of food.